Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Is exciting.
This time, we're going back to ancient India,
Okay.
and more specifically to a period, around 600 to 300 BCE.
Right.
A really fascinating period because you see some major cultural shifts happening.
Yeah, a time of upheaval.
For centuries before this, the Vedas were really dominant.
Absolutely foundational, you could say.
With all those rituals and hymns.
Yeah.
They were really the guiding force in Indian society.
Yeah, and then suddenly, boom, things start to change.
That's what we're going to look at today.
This shift.
How these new spiritual ideas,
Buddhism, Jainism.
exactly how they challenge that old Vedic way of thinking.
And it really turned society upside down.
Yeah, it wasn't just a little change.
No.
These were entirely new faiths emerging.
Right, and they offered these different paths, to spiritual enlightenment.
And what's really interesting is they made these paths available to everyone.
That's the key.
Not just the elite.
Yeah, before this, it was like if you wanted to understand the big questions
about the universe, our place in it.
Yeah, you had to go through the Brahmins.
The priestly class.
They were the gatekeepers of knowledge.
So what did these new faiths offer that was so different?
Well, I think the biggest thing was they challenged the authority.
Of the Vedas.
Yeah, and the Brahmins too.
So they're saying you don't need those elaborate rituals or sacrifices to reach liberation.
Right, you can find your own path.
Through things like meditation and ethical living.
Self-reflection, yeah.
It's like taking control of your own spiritual journey.
Exactly.
No more middleman.
Right.
But to really understand the scope of this shift.
Yeah, we need some context.
We got to go back a bit.
Back to the Vedas.
What were they all about and why were they so influential for so long?
The Vedas are incredible.
I mean, they're this vast collection.
Of hymns and prayers, but also philosophical ideas.
Yeah, and they really lay the groundwork for Hinduism.
They had a huge impact on all aspects of Indian culture.
Like if you want a glimpse into how the ancient Indians saw the world.
Your worldview, yeah.
You got to look at the Vedas.
It's a window into the past.
And it wasn't just one book, right?
Right.
I mean, you mentioned there are actually 4 Vedas.
Right. You have the Rig Veda, Samaveda, Yajurveda, and Atharva Veda.
Each one with its own focus.
Yeah, adding to the complexity of ancient Indian thought.
Like the Rig Veda, that's the oldest one, right?
Yes, the Rig Veda focuses on hymns.
Like all these different deities.
Right. And some of them are so poetic.
Really insightful.
Yeah.
I remember this one passage from the Rig Veda about Ishas.
The goddess of dawn.
Yeah, it said, "She shines upon us like a young wife, rousing every living being to go forth to his work. The fire had to be kindled by men. She made the light by which we see our way."
Beautiful imagery.
It's amazing how they pack so much symbolism
into this simple description of sunrise.
It's not just symbolism, though, right?
No.
It shows how they understood this concept of the divine feminine.
This power to awaken not just the world,
but also human consciousness.
Exactly.
And that idea of awakening is really key.
To understanding that shift that happened.
With Buddhism and Jainism.
Yeah, they offered a different kind of awakening.
One that wasn't tied to all those Vedic rituals.
Right.
So let's dive into some of the core concepts from the Vedas.
The big words.
The ones that really shaped Indian thought. Brahman, Atman, Dharma, and Karma.
We hear these words a lot, but they have such deep meanings.
So let's break it down.
Okay.
Let's start with Brahman.
Brahman is like the ultimate reality, the cosmic principle.
Like where everything comes from.
Yeah, think of it as the source code of the universe.
It's beyond description, really.
Beyond comprehension.
Like the canvas the whole universe is painted on.
Exactly.
And then there's Atman.
Atman is you.
Me.
Well, not you specifically, but the individual self, your soul.
Okay.
That spark of Brahman that's within each of us.
So we're not just separate beings.
Yeah.
We're part of something bigger.
Much greater, something eternal.
That's powerful.
It is.
And I can see how these ideas maybe laid the groundwork for what was to come.
You're starting to see the connections.
Yeah, so we've got Brahman, the ultimate reality, and Atman, the individual soul.
Right.
But what about Dharma and Karma?
How do they fit in?
Well, Dharma is all about duty.
Righteousness.
Living in alignment with that cosmic order.
It's recognizing that your actions have consequences.
Not just for you.
But for everyone.
For the whole universe.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
And that's where karma comes in.
Okay.
It's the idea that every action, every thought, even every intention...
It's a ripple effect.
Shaping not just this life.
But maybe future lives, too.
You could say Dharma is the rule book.
And Karma is the scorecard.
I like that.
So these Vedic ideas, they were deeply embedded in Indian society.
They were the foundation.
But they also had the seeds for change.
How so?
Well, think about the idea of Atman.
Okay.
That individual soul connected to this ultimate reality.
Right.
That's a powerful concept.
It is.
And it could lead people to start questioning things.
Like what?
Well, like if I'm part of this divine essence, why do I need a priest to tell me how to live my life?
I see.
Why can't I find my own way to connect with the divine?
That's a good point.
So you're saying even though the Vedas were this dominant force,
Yes.
they also had this potential for disruption,
Absolutely.
for a new way of thinking about spirituality.
And that's exactly what happened with Buddhism and Jainism.
They took those core ideas and kind of turned them on their head,
They did.
offering a more egalitarian and accessible path to liberation.
A path for everyone. Yeah, it's amazing how these new faiths, they came from that same cultural background as the Vedas, but they offered something so radically different.
So let's get into that. How do they challenge the established order?
Well, if you think about the social structure back then, the caste system was deeply ingrained,
Right.
and the Brahmins, they held so much power.
As the keepers of knowledge.
Exactly. They were the ones who interpreted the Vedas and conducted all the rituals.
But then Buddhism and Jainism come along and say, wait a minute.
Spiritual liberation shouldn't be limited to a select few.
Right. Everyone has the potential.
Awaken.
It's like they were breaking down those barriers.
Democratizing spiritual wisdom.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
But what did it look like in practice? How did they spread their teachings?
They took a very different approach. Instead of these big elaborate rituals and
Right.
expensive sacrifices, they focused on personal transformation.
Through what?
Things like meditation,
Okay.
ethical conduct, and compassion.
So their message, it really connected with people,
It's from all walks of life.
especially those who felt excluded by that Vedic system.
Exactly.
So it wasn't just about rejecting the old ways.
No, it was about creating something new.
Something more inclusive.
A path for everyone.
Can you give us some specific examples of how these ideas actually change things?
Sure.
Like how does society change?
Well, one of the key concepts both in Buddhism and Jainism is ahimsa, nonviolence.
Okay.
This idea had a huge impact on everything.
How so?
It challenged the idea of animal sacrifice.
Which was a big part of Vedic rituals.
Right, and they promoted vegetarianism as a way of life.
That's a pretty radical shift in thinking.
It was, especially for a society that had practiced animal sacrifice for centuries.
Absolutely. And this emphasis on nonviolence, it went beyond just animals, right?
Yeah, it extended to human interactions as well.
So they were encouraging people to resolve their conflicts peacefully,
Yes.
to cultivate compassion, even for their enemies.
That was a radical idea.
They were really promoting a more peaceful and harmonious society.
Absolutely.
Did these ideas have any impact on the caste system?
Because that was so entrenched.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how rigid it was.
They didn't dismantle the caste system outright,
Okay.
but they definitely challenged its rigidity.
How?
They emphasized that spiritual worth. It wasn't about your birth.
Not where you came from.
It was about your actions and intentions.
So it didn't matter your social status.
Everyone had that potential for spiritual growth.
And enlightenment?
That was a powerful message for people who were traditionally excluded from the spiritual realm.
Incredibly empowering.
And this message of inclusivity and equality, it helped to create a more fluid society.
With more opportunities.
It opened up new possibilities.
For people to move beyond those prescribed roles.
And find their own paths.
It's amazing to think about the ripple effect of these ideas.
They weren't just abstract concepts.
They changed how people lived their lives.
And how they viewed the world.
It was a real social transformation.
And these changes weren't confined to India.
Oh, right. Buddhism spread far and wide.
It influenced cultures all over Asia and eventually the whole world.
So we've got these two new faiths, Buddhism and Jainism.
Emerging at this pivotal moment.
They're offering a more accessible and inclusive approach to spirituality.
And they're challenging the authority of the Vedas and the Brahmins.
And at the same time, they're reshaping cultural norms.
And creating a more egalitarian society.
It's like this domino effect.
Of new ideas and social transformation.
And let's not forget the arts.
Oh yeah, this is a period of incredible creativity.
With new forms of expression emerging to reflect these new spiritual ideas.
Like Buddhist art and architecture.
With your emphasis on serenity and contemplation.
Yeah, they became powerful visual representations of that Buddhist worldview.
So these new ideas, they sparked a creative renaissance.
You could say that.
I'm curious, we talked about how the Vedas reflected those anxieties and aspirations of the society going through a transition.
From a nomadic lifestyle to a more settled one.
Did Buddhism and Jainism also respond to the challenges of their time?
Of course.
Like what challenges?
Well, one of the big ones was the growing complexity of society as cities grew and trade expanded.
Okay.
People were facing these new pressures.
Social and economic.
And Buddhism and Jainism, they offered a way to navigate these challenges by emphasizing inner peace and ethical conduct
Okay.
and detachment from material possessions.
So they were providing a framework for living a meaningful life.
In a world that was constantly changing.
It's like they were saying, look, the world outside might be chaotic.
But you can find peace and stability within.
That must have been a comforting message.
It was, especially during uncertain times.
So we've talked about the social and cultural impact
Of these new faiths.
But what about the music?
Yeah.
We mentioned earlier that music and spirituality were intertwined.
Remember the Samaveda?
One of the 4 Vedas.
It focuses on melody and chant.
Okay.
And those hymns, they were meant to be sung.
Really?
They were considered so powerful.
They could transport you to another state of consciousness.
Yeah.
Like ancient India had its own spiritual soundtrack.
Exactly.
And did this continue with Buddhism and Jainism?
Well, they didn't have the same elaborate rituals.
Wow.
They still recognized the power of music.
To connect people to something bigger than themselves,
As a universal language.
transcending those religious boundaries.
Think about the role music plays in spiritual traditions today.
Still so important.
It brings people together, inspires devotion.
And expresses those deepest longings of the human heart. It's
Exactly.
like music was a bridge,
Between the old and the new.
connecting the Vedic traditions to these emerging faiths.
In a way that transcended words.
And rituals.
People could experience spirituality in a very visceral and emotional way.
Regardless of their beliefs.
It was a reminder that even amidst all the change,
There was this deeper connection.
that united everyone.
You know, it's amazing how these ideas of nonviolence and compassion and self-reflection,
Simple yet profound.
they had such a huge impact.
It really shows you the power of ideas.
Could change the world.
And what's interesting is it wasn't like this sudden overthrow.
Of the old ways.
No, it was gradual.
This shift in consciousness that happened over centuries.
A slow but steady transformation.
So Buddhism and Jainism, they didn't just wipe out the Vedic traditions.
No, not at all.
It wasn't like they just appeared and everything changed overnight.
It was more like a weaving together of different threads.
Blending old and new.
Like a tapestry.
And, you know, a lot of the core concepts in Buddhism and Jainism,
Like karma and reincarnation.
they have roots in the Vedic tradition.
They do.
So they were building on what came before.
Offering a new perspective.
A new way of understanding these concepts.
And that's something that still happens today.
How so?
Well, think about how different cultures,
Around the world.
they've incorporated elements of Buddhism and Jainism.
Into their own beliefs.
It shows that these ideas have this timeless quality.
A universal appeal.
They transcend cultures and time periods.
I'm curious, though, what happened to the Vedic traditions?
Did they just disappear?
Did these new faiths completely replace them?
Not exactly.
Okay.
The Vedic traditions, they evolved.
They didn't just vanish.
They continue to be a vital part of Indian culture.
Influencing everything.
From religious practices to social norms to philosophy.
So it was more of a dynamic interplay.
Between these different spiritual currents.
Not one replacing the other.
Exactly.
And that interplay, it created this incredibly rich tapestry.
Of Indian spirituality.
That we still see today.
A tapestry woven from threads of Vedic, Buddhist, Jain, and countless other traditions.
This has been such a fascinating journey.
I agree.
We started by exploring the world of the Vedas.
Those foundational texts that shaped Indian thought for centuries.
And then we saw how Buddhism and Jainism emerged.
Offering a more accessible and inclusive approach to spirituality.
They challenged the old ways.
And reshaped cultural norms.
And they didn't erase the past.
They interacted with it, created something new.
A more dynamic spiritual landscape.
It's a reminder that cultures are constantly evolving.
Adapting and reinventing themselves.
And even during times of great change,
there's this thread
that connects us to the past.
While pushing us forward.
Into the future.
That's what makes history so captivating.
It's not just about dates and facts.
It's about understanding the forces that shape who we are.
It's about seeing the connections.
And recognizing that the past.
It's not fixed.
It's alive.
It continues to speak to us.
Challenge us.
And inspire us.
I'm leaving this deep dive
with a sense of wonder.
It's incredible how ideas that emerged thousands of years ago,
they still resonate with us today.
It's a testament to the human spirit.
Our search for meaning.
Our desire for connection.
And our need to understand ourselves and the universe.
And it reminds us that the journey of spiritual exploration,
It's open to everyone.
no matter our background or beliefs.
Or our place in history.
Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey.
Through ancient India.
We hope you've gained a deeper appreciation
For the richness of Indian spirituality.
and the power of ideas to change the world.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning.
And keep seeking that wisdom that's all around us.